Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Essential Liberties Podcast. Today we're going to take a look at how to win an election. Not the right way, not the honest way, not the respectful way to argue based on ideas, on perspectives, on philosophies, but how to get down into the mud, into the nitty gritty of it. And I'm not saying that this is the way that the official campaign people will run a campaign, but understand that when it comes to winning an election, there is so much that's done beneath the surface of the actual campaign. All the tremendous pools of dark money lurking in the corners, all of the PACs that have names that you don't understand and that don't tie them to any people or any particular group. How to get into the campaign with the money. We're going to take a look at an example from just recently. Now, I'm not saying this is connected to the Joe Biden campaign, but this is certainly connected to people who are looking for Joe Biden to win, how they've got down into the dirt. Now, the way I see this, the reason that this is happening is quite simple. We've lost in politics today any sense of right and wrong. There's no objective truth. There's no this is right to do, this is wrong to do. You can do this, you can't do that. This is a sort of political nihilism. Nihilism meaning just nothingness, right? Nothing matters. There's no objective truth. There's no right. There's no wrong. There's no areas that you can't go because they're just not honorable to be in. When that becomes the case, all that's left is power. Just power. Pure, unadulterated power. And the only goal, when power is all that matters, when you're not bound by any right or wrong or truth, all that matters is how do you get more of the power? So recently there was a story that broke. I first saw it on National Public Radio. It was a whistleblower report that came from someone that worked inside a federal detention facility. You can see the headline here. This is how I first read it. Whistleblower alleges medical neglect, questionable hysterectomies of ICE detainees. Now, let's look at why this story and why at this time. If you're following the polls, shortly before this, what you saw and what got some fair amount of coverage was the fact that Joe Biden was struggling in the state of Florida. Florida, we know in this election cycle, is going to be critical. It may be one of two states that actually decide this one. Right now in Florida, Joe Biden needs a certain percentage of the Hispanic vote in order to carry that state. The Hispanic voting bloc in that state is very large, one of the largest in the nation. Joe Biden needs that, and polling was showing that Joe Biden was falling behind that key demographic. Another large voting bloc in Florida, of course, is the military. There's a tremendous amount of military votes in Florida. Again, some of the most in the country are members of the armed services, live and reside in the state of Florida. So you have these two groups that Biden is struggling with. Now, what do you see that happens? Now, what did Joe Biden do? Officially, he went to Florida. He met with some Hispanic community groups, gave a speech for members of the armed forces, or at least directed toward them. That's what's on the surface. Right? That's what the official campaign is doing. That's all the official campaign could do. Right? But now a couple of stories broke just following the reporting of that polling. One of them was a report that President Trump had called servicemen who died in service, he called them losers. And he refused to view a military cemetery on that day. Now, this was, of course, an anonymous article citing anonymous sources. No names tied to this. It used to be in journalism that you occasionally saw an anonymous source when they were so deep and it was so dangerous for them to reveal that story that they simply couldn't. But the anonymous source was almost always corroborated by other sources, by the facts. But in the piece that ran about that comment from the military, what you heard was a lot of the people, in fact, everybody that was tied to that event, that was in that location at that time when this statement was alleged to have been made, said it never was made. But again, by the time the news story runs and it does its damage and its front page and the media is complicit in pushing that narrative out there, letting people see it, by the time the evidence mounts that it ever actually was said, well, the retraction or the apology or the counter story always gets many, many fewer views than did the actual story. So, in effect, the damage has been done. Now, everybody in that room, including some people who are certainly not allies of President Trump. John Bolton was in that room. John Bolton published a book, 300, 400, 500 pages, trying to dismantle the legacy of Donald Trump. After Donald Trump fired him, they don't get along very well. And John Bolton put that in book form, attacking the president. He said it never happened. He said it was never said. There was an entirely different set of actual facts from the people that were there. But why did this story emerge when it did? Joe Biden lagging in the polls amongst military members, not in all states, because in all states it doesn't matter. Some states are Republican, some states are Democrat. They're going to go that way. But Florida is a toss-up. Florida is very close. So you're focusing that story, right, to that audience in that state, again, to that voting bloc that is extremely critical for him to win that state. The timing of it, you can't believe is coincidence. Now, I'm not linking this to the Biden campaign, although they certainly commented on it after it became a news story. But why that story? Why that time? Why right after those polling results came out? That's the dark side of politics. That's the dark money. That's the affiliated organizations, not officially affiliated with the campaign, but working on the side, working from the shadows to try to uncover, to rake this muck up, get someone to say it, get someone to publish it, get someone to be an anonymous source. Now, a lot of news outlets wouldn't cover that, but here's how it usually goes, right? Is that a lot of reputable news sources will look at a story like that and say, there's absolutely no corroboration to that story. In fact, the people that we've called on background to verify this say not only they don't know, but it absolutely didn't happen. So to maintain their standards of journalistic integrity, they simply can't run it. But here's what they can do. And you saw this with the Steele dossier, and this was in 2016. No reputable news source would publish that until a disreputable one, I think it was Vox, published it, which gives all the reputable news sources the cover of saying, well, now that it's out there, now it's news for being out there, and now we're going to cover it. So this story broke, it was refuted, specifically timed to make up for a deficit in the polling amongst a large voting bloc in Florida. Again, this is not the campaign. But this is what is working for the campaign, doing the dirty work for the campaign, those things that they cannot be associated with. So the other story that broke, when I started with, was the whistleblower report from the detention facility in Georgia. Headline reads, alleged medical neglect, questionable hysterectomies of ICE detainees. That seems kind of odd, but maybe they didn't have a lot to go with. So the story started out with simply an explanation of a whistleblower report. Now, this was somebody that worked in the medical staff, a nurse. She worked on the staff 3 or 4 months after her hours were reduced. All of a sudden, she files a whistleblower report. That's the first suspicious thing to me. Because if you're fired or demoted or used on an as-needed basis, essentially iced out of employment, and you've got this big story to tell, are you going to wait 3 months? Here's what I think happened. I can't prove this, and I will present this as speculation, but somebody needing a story along these lines found her and encouraged her to file this report, interviewed her, went through some of these details, and convinced her that she needed to take this to the authorities to file a report on this. Now, we're going to take a look at the substance of it in just a second. But why this story, why at this time? Why from the dark recesses of the corner of the political action committees doing the dirty work for the campaign, the nihilists who doesn't matter if it's true or not, but just need and are seeking more power and doing that by trying to elect their candidate? Why this story? Why at this time? Well, it goes back to the polling numbers. About this time, it had been reported that the support of the Hispanic population in Florida for Joe Biden was significantly lower than it was for Hillary Clinton. And as we know, Hillary Clinton lost Florida by a very slim margin. Joe Biden needs to hold on to that particular voting block in order for him to have a chance to win that state. So, from the dark corners of dirty politics, they went after the military voting block, but now they needed a story to go after and to harm Trump in the eyes of the Hispanic population. So, this story starts out fairly benign. It seems like a set of what's really no more than some process violations happening at this detention facility. So it's a detention facility run. The U.S. government doesn't run all of their detention facilities. They outsource this. So the detention facility, the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia. It houses immigrants detained by the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So people are arrested. They're put into this facility. There's a company named LaSalle Corrections that operates this detention facility. So a lady by the name of Dawn Wooten, and she's named in the article, a nurse who worked at the facility, and then she was suddenly demoted. This was back in July. The story breaks in September. So 2 months after she no longer worked there. And there's a little update that wasn't in the original story. So here's what she said. She's represented by the Government Accountability Project, a fairly left-leaning organization. A couple of other groups, Project South, very similar, a social justice advocacy group. And then it says here, a coalition of some other people. So preface the story by saying, and in the story, it prefaces by saying that advocates in Georgia have raised red flags about human rights violations in this facility for years. We haven't heard much about it. My research turned up a little more than some speculation on their part. But what Ms. Wooten said was that there was some refusal to test detainees for COVID. She mentioned some destruction of medical requests, so some complaint forms and things and requests that came in from the immigrants, the detainees. Fabricated medical records, allowing employees to work while symptomatic, withholding information from detainees who tested positive, underreporting COVID-19 cases, and the like. So things that probably are wrong, violate the process and the procedure, maybe even some laws. I think that would be fair to say. But basically, some transgressions amongst the employees that are working there. Some employees that maybe were too lazy, that didn't care enough about what they were doing. So they ignored some requests. They didn't properly test according to their protocols. And so while that is not good and doesn't shine a great light on this property and this detention facility, it really is nothing that creates a good headline, right? Really nothing that is say, damning. And so there's some other things in the report, unsafe practices, mixing detainees with and without COVID. So all things that are wrong, but don't necessarily make a great headline, don't really hit Trump where they need to hit Trump. Now, despite the fact that the organization running the facility says this, it vehemently disputes the implication that detainees are used for experimental medical procedures. So that's a response, but the part of the report that it's a response to is this. Right? The complaint says that, and this is kind of at the end of the report. So there's all these process procedural violations, things that may be violations of law. But again, nothing really damning, nothing that's going to make headlines. So now listen how this works and look at the ability that we would have, or that anybody would have, to actually prove this part of the complaint. According to the complaint, a detained immigrant, so somebody in the detention facility, somebody violating the law who has been arrested and placed in this facility, that she talked to 5 women at the facility who received hysterectomies between October and December 2019 and said they reacted confused when explaining why they had one done. So, all right, when I met these women who had surgeries, I thought it was like an experimental concentration camp. Again, so now this information comes from a detainee at the facility through a disgruntled fired nurse to the whistleblower report. So this is not anybody reporting on what actually happened to them, whistleblowing on an experience they had. Nor is it someone filing on the behalf of somebody who provided direct information, direct testimony to this happening. This is a detainee in the facility telling a nurse who's been fired, who's disgruntled, that filed this report. Now, here's a problem with this. How do you prove this? How do you prove that this didn't happen? Well, there are some ways, perhaps, records and things like that at the actual medical facility. But here's why this type of testimony is never allowed in court. If I come into court and my testimony is my neighbor was told by somebody who knew a guy that said Bob Smith tried to hire him to kill someone. How do I prove that that didn't happen? I don't know who these people are. We can't call them to testify in person. It's all hearsay, and that's what we call it in court. And it's not allowed there because it can't be examined. It can't be refuted. This is some third and fourth hand information that made it into not the real body of this whistleblower complaint, but kind of toward the end. What I suspect, and again, pure speculation, happened that after these people working on behalf of the Biden campaign, but not directly connected to them, after they sought out somebody who was fired from that facility because they wanted a story that would damage Trump with the Hispanic voters in Florida, found this lady, they questioned her, and they said, yeah, there's some stuff here, but it's not really good. What else? What else do you know? What else have you heard? What are the rumors? What is the innuendo? What is the break room talk? Right? What more can you give us? And we come up with this story. Now, a top medical official with ICE disputed the claim, saying in a statement that the agency data shows only 2 women who have been referred for hysterectomies from the facility since 2018. And I don't know what the rate of need for hysterectomies are in the general population. But this facility that houses somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 people, I'm assuming some come, some go, over that period of time, would 2 be normal? I don't know for sure, but I would assume that would fall into kind of what you would expect out of that group. So we have no records of it, but we have a detainee that told the fired nurse that she had talked to people, 5 of them, who had hysterectomies. Once again, examine that chain of evidence. If I was told by somebody, if I'm the official, and if I was told by somebody, hey, I talked to somebody else, and they said this happened to 5 people, that's kind of a common thing. It is with kids, it is with adults. When my kids come to me with a complaint, it's usually not what they want, it's what the whole neighborhood wants. Everyone wants a popsicle. Can we have one? Everyone doesn't like this. We hear this in the schools. We hear this in the workplaces. As a manager, a former manager at a company, as a vice president of a large sales organization, almost everybody that came to me with a complaint never did so on their own behalf. But, everyone was talking and they want this changed. All right, well, let's get everyone together. The exaggeration of how much support or how many times things have happened is a very common device used in a negotiation, used when lodging a complaint. It may have happened one time. Somebody may have in that facility had this procedure, been confused about it, talked to this lady, who then, to make it seem more significant, when she was talking to the disgruntled nurse who was then fired, picked a number, well, it was 5. 5 people had this happen. So Then we go on into the real kind of the headline making of this article. What you see is this doctor, who's not named, is now referred to as the uterus collector. Now, there's a headline. That's something that you can go with. That's something that will get you some traction. That might do the damage that you're looking to do. There's some comparisons then to experimentation in the Nazi prison camps, in the death camps in Nazi Germany. They compare it to that. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we've got something that we can make a headline of. And it's the reality is, the sad reality is, most people only read the headlines. Most people read only from one news source or maybe a couple. Most people never to go and actually read the article down to the 12th, 15th, 20th paragraph where they bury all the evidence against what they are alleging just happened in the first half of the article. So there's some things happening then. There's this complaint. It's being refuted. It'll be investigated. And if anything like this in reality actually happened, well, somebody should be prosecuted for it. But the likelihood that there is in a detention facility in Georgia a doctor performing these surgeries unnecessarily, collecting uteruses, and he can somehow get away with that with all the support staff involved in a surgery, the nurses, the technicians, the anesthesiologist, everybody that has to be involved in that surgery. How could someone get away with this 5 times with none of those other medical professionals sworn to doing no harm to their patients stand back and say, that's okay. We're not going to say anything about it. Shh. So on one half of this allegation, we have the records of the facility. We have the testimony, or we will have the testimony, of all the medical staff involved in this, none of which have come forward to corroborate any of this. We have that versus a fired employee, wrongly or rightly, I'm not sure, but she's certainly disgruntled. We have a disgruntled employee who talked to someone, a detainee, who didn't tell her about her personal experience, where there's only a couple degrees of separation, but told us about the experience of these 5 other people. It seems to imply that there's even more. Some joint statements are made. There's a little bit of background information. There's some civil rights complaints having been filed. That's all fine, and we will see. But I would assume this: nothing will ever come of this. The reason nothing will ever come of this, because there's nothing there. But you know what? That's irrelevant. From the dark corners of politics, from the dark money who are funding the PACs, the organizations, the operatives that are digging up this dirt, slinging it through the media with their consent, with their compliance. They're slinging it out there because I tell you what, who cares on November 5th if a report comes out saying that this never happened, that they did the investigation, that they made the conclusions, that none of this ever happened? Who cares? Because the purpose is not to get to the truth behind this. That will never make a story. That'll never make a newspaper. You'll never see about it again. But it doesn't matter, because it's not being put out there for the sake of justice, for the sake of a claim against somebody's civil rights, to defend those rights, to make sure that that person at least somehow gets some closure from this. That's not why. On November 5th, this story doesn't matter. The damage has been done. Now, one of the things I want to show you, when I do a Google search, look what you find when it comes to these articles. Look what you find. So you have the original NPR story. The next story from MSN, unpacking the explosive allegations that a uterus collector. Gynecologist dubbed uterus collector by Georgia ICE. Even if you look at what you find in the search results right here, a gynecologist dubbed the uterus collector performed hysterectomies on everybody he saw. That was the allegation. Told to the whistleblower by somebody about something that she claimed she had heard. Everybody he saw. So he's just walking around. Right? He's just walking around through the hospital facility with a scalpel in his hand, cutting out every uterus he sees. That's what the headline implies. It's not about the reality of the story. It doesn't mention the fact that this is a third and fourth hand account refuted by records, not corroborated by anybody. That's not the point. Most people don't get to that far down in the article. But that's what you hear. It doesn't say in this MSN piece anything about the fact that it's an allegation. See right here? What does this make you believe? What does this make you feel about the veracity or the proof behind this allegation? A gynecologist dubbed the uterus collector performed, not may have, not as alleged to, performed hysterectomies on everybody he saw at a Georgia immigrant detention facility, a whistleblower nurse has claimed. But the nurse hasn't claimed it. The nurse hasn't claimed that is a point of fact. Not at all. I mean, she said it. She passed it on. But this is the testimony of a detainee in a facility, somebody who's broken the law. This is the report of what that person heard or said she heard from other people. The Daily Beast ICE whistleblower complaint alleges uterus collector. He's taking all their uteruses out, whistleblower. That's from the new civilrightsmovement.com. I'm not familiar with what that is. NPR, again, another link to their story. Medical neglect. The subheadline talked about the hysterectomies rather than using the term uterus collector. So maybe we expect a little bit better from NPR. So those are the headlines. So you see how this is working, right? There's a problem with the campaign. There's a polling number that suggests that there's a problem. There's a state that they need to win. There are voting blocks that the campaign needs to influence, and they can't do it themselves. They can go down and sit at the town halls. They can answer the questions. They can hold the press conferences. They can do all of that. It doesn't really move the needle. That doesn't inflict the type of harm on their opponent that they want to inflict. So coordinated or not, what happens from these dark corners of politics? This money pours in. It funds the operatives. It funds the PACs. It funds the groups that work in the shadows, that go out, fabricate something, use rumor and innuendo, feed it to the media who's complicit. They put it out there, and it does the damage. Neither of these stories that we talked about, the story about Trump calling people in the military, the people that had died, losers, none of that's corroborated. And in fact, when something is not corroborated by 17 different people, it is refuted. Because where they said it happened, nobody said it happened that way. But it doesn't matter. The story's done the damage. That has the effect, they hope, on the intended voting bloc, which is the military people in Florida, and they hope to move that needle because Biden needs more of their votes to win. The nurses' allegations. Somebody from those same dark corners found somebody and probably looked at a group of people or all the people that may have been fired from that facility, went out, talked to them, interviewed them, gathered what their report was, what they had heard, and then encouraged them to file this complaint. That didn't happen by accident, not months after this person was fired. And then she talks about some violations in testing and in record keeping, maybe even the destruction of records. Again, procedural things, all things that are wrong. But that wasn't enough. They dug deeper. They dug deeper. And as they did, what did they find? Well, some rumor and innuendo, nothing that would ever be reported by a reputable news source, nothing that you could ever admit into a court of law. But in a whistleblower report, there are no rules. So she had heard from someone that had heard from somebody that this thing happened. They put some terminology behind it. They gave it a fancy name, a name they could sell, a uterus collector. Nazi-style experiments. The man is walking around cutting uteruses out of everybody he meets. Put it in a report. Feed it to the media. See, while they would never publish the allegations, once it's in a report, how they justify it is, well, the report is news. We can cover that. Folks, this is how politics works. And the reason it works this way is because we have entirely lost track. We have given up, we have discarded objective truth. We have discarded the fact that objectively there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong, and there's very little gray area in between. Because once we don't have truth, once we don't have what is right and wrong to limit our behavior, to draw lines that we do not cross, once we've eliminated that, there's only one thing left, and it is raw, naked power. There is only power. And when there's only power, the only goal is how do you get more of it? These are some examples of that from the dark corners, from the nihilistic corners of politics. Folks, that's enough for today. Again, my name is J. David Gilgey, the host of the Essential Liberties podcast. If you like what you heard today and are looking for more, please like, please subscribe, come back and see us again. Thank you for listening to the Essential Liberties podcast. Please subscribe for more great discussions on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you, my friends.